Hi guys, my name is Ashley,
I'm Krystle.
And I'm Janet.
and today we're going to be talking about our topic, death and dying. So, real quickly, here were the top 10 causes of death in 2017. 2017 was the most recent year that we could find these. So, very briefly, we have heart disease, cancer, injuries, lower respiratory disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, influenza, kidney disease, and suicide. And we're going to go through briefly each one. So for the first one, we have heart disease. And in 2017, almost 3 million people died. It was about 2.8 million people. And of those 2.8 million people, 23% of them died from heart disease. So some of these symptoms can include chest pain, shortness of breath, pain in the neck, in the jaw, and in the throat. And some of the risk factors include age. Basically, if you are 65 or older, you're more prone to have it. It depends on sex, it depends on your diet, and it depends if you smoke or not. According to the CDC, it shows that women actually have different symptoms than men if they do have heart disease. So if women do have heart disease, they have higher testosterone levels prior to menopause, they have higher hypertension during menopause, and they are more prone to stress and depression. Heart disease can be treated with healthy lifestyle choices. So if you don't smoke, if you are more active, if you eat healthy, if you reduce stress and you treat depression, you can help treat heart disease. Number 2, we have cancer. And in 2017, it caused 21.3% of all deaths. There are actually 100 different types of cancers. And according to this graph we have from the American Cancer Society, breast cancer is actually the most worried about, but lung cancer was actually the one that most people died from. And the reason why is because the symptoms that they have in the beginning, it's really hard to catch. So once people do find out that they have lung cancer, it might be too late for them to start treating it. All right, lung cancer is actually how my grandmother died. I'm gonna go into it a little bit more with the ABCX interview with my sister, but she did die from lung disease. So since there are 100 different types of cancers, there are different types of symptoms for each. But some overall symptoms can include weight loss, fever, fatigue, pain, skin changes, so it could be darker, it could be red, yellowish, there could be some itching, and there could be some hair growth. And some risk factors include things that you can't really help, such as your age and your family history. So if someone in your family has had cancer before, there is a higher chance of you getting it. And there are some things that you can do to help reduce your risk of cancer. These are avoid alcohol, avoid tobacco, and you can have a better diet.
Okay, so we have our third one, which is unintentional injuries and accidents. This is accounted for 6% of all deaths in 2017. These include motor vehicle accidents, accidental drug overdose, as we saw in the last presentation, sport and recreational injuries similar to Superman, falling, unintentional poisoning, and more. A lot of people recognize this as car accidents since it happens very often in our society. 6 million accidents happen each year, and more than 90 people die from an accident each year. If you wear a seatbelt, it can reduce injuries by 45%, and it is known that it's better to around 15 minutes away from your house is where mostly people have accidents. So it's better to be recognized of all your surroundings and stuff like that, especially in an accident. Personally, I've been in a couple accidents, and it's really scary when you get into one, and it causes a lot of PTSD, and for those, it can cause a lot of driving anxiety afterwards. And now there is also drunk driving, which has been very popular and very known. It's not a great way. A lot of teen drivers happen this way, and they have these deaths. Now, we always see in the freeways is those billboard signs, drunk driving, don't do it, buzz driving. In high school, we have these things called every 15 minutes where we pretty much gather for one day and we see like an actual like accident, what happens, and like all like the consequences and things that happen. And reluctantly, these have helped reduce drunk driving, but it's still a big issue today, and we should be more aware about it.
All right, number 4 is the chronic lower respiratory disease, and this counted for 5.7 all deaths in 2017. So there are actually different types that this kind of goes into, but the most common diseases are the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, also COPD for short, and asthma. And people who are more at risk for this are people who smoke tobacco, people who are around a lot of air pollution and allergens. Some asthma symptoms include breathlessness and wheezing, but it kind of differs depending on the person, really. Asthma is pretty common among young children. And then COPD symptoms include breathlessness, the kind of need for air, excessive saliva and mucus production, and a chronic cough. So both of these are not curable, but they do have treatments, and the most effective and cost-effective is actually smoking cessation. So if you are able to stop smoking, you have a much better chance. And number 5, we have strokes. This accounted for 5.2% of all deaths in 2017. And basically a stroke is when blood flow to the brain is blocked and your brain cells die from that. So there are actually 3 different types of strokes. We have ischemic, which is when a clot is obstructing the blood flow, and this accounts for about 87% of all strokes. Then we have hemorrhagic, which is when a blood vessel is ruptured and it's causing a disrupt from blood to the brain. And the last one is transient, and it's kind of like a mini stroke with a temporary block of blood flow to the brain. So there are some ways that you can prevent these, but if you do see someone having a stroke, you have to act fast, which is what they recommend doing because it can really save a life if you're acting fast enough. So F stands for face drooping, A stands for arm weakness, S stands for speech difficulty, and T stands for time to call 911. So really, if you see the symptoms, it can make the difference between someone living and dying. Some risk factors include high cholesterol levels and blood pressure and age. So older people are more susceptible, but the risk is actually higher for them and for babies or children under the age of 1. It also differs with sex. At younger ages, men are more likely than women to have a stroke, but women tend to live longer, so their lifetime risk of having a stroke is higher. Women who take birth control pills or use hormone replacement therapy are at a higher risk, and women also at a higher risk during pregnancy and in the weeks after giving birth. In terms of race and ethnicity, in the United States, strokes occur more often in African American, Alaska Native, American Indian, and Hispanic adults than white adults. So prevention, again, the fast, but also being active and eating better, which leads to lower cholesterol and blood sugar. Next one, we have Alzheimer's disease. I think everyone's seen The Notebook by now. But Alzheimer's disease accounted for 4.3% of deaths in 2017. And there's actually 3 stages of Alzheimer's disease. So we have mild, which is the memory loss and the cognitive difficulties. So at this stage, you can see someone with Alzheimer's kind of wandering around and getting lost, and it's taking them a little bit longer to complete everyday tasks. The second stage is moderate. This is when people are having difficulties recognizing people. They're not really able to learn new things. At this point, they may have hallucinations and paranoia. And then finally, we have number 3, which is severe. And it's basically when the brain tissue shrinks significantly. So at this point, someone might not be able to communicate, and it's when their body starts to shut down. So the cause is still being researched, but doctors believe that it may have something to do with the brain deteriorating along with age. They also suspect that it can depend on the genetics, on environment, and your lifestyle choices. And since there is no cure, the treatments kind of vary for people who do have Alzheimer's disease. So different drugs work on different people, and basically the main focus is to help with mental function. And next one, we have diabetes, which accounted for 4.3% of all deaths in 2017. And there's two different types. We have type 1. It's when your body doesn't make insulin and you have to take it every day to stay alive. So this usually happens in children or young adults, but it can happen at any age, really. And it's caused by genes or environmental factors, but there's no exact cause for sure. Type 2, it's when your body doesn't really make or use it very well, insulin, I mean. So it's usually seen in middle-aged and older people, but again, can happen at any age. It is the most common type of diabetes, and it's caused by several factors such as lifestyle and genes. Some of the treatments that you can make with type 2 diabetes is making healthy life choices and being more active. And next we have influenza and pneumonia. So this caused 3% of all deaths in 2017. For influenza, it's just basically another word for the flu. So symptoms include fever, cough, sore throat, runny, stuffy nose, body aches, headaches, and fatigue. And treatment, according to the CDC, antiviral drugs actually help lessen symptoms and shorten the time of sickness, and it can also prevent pneumonia. Later on, Krystle will go into some examples of influenza. And for pneumonia, we have symptoms being chest pain, cough, fatigue, fever, lower body temperature, nausea, and shortness of breath. And people over 65 or younger than 2 are more likely to develop it. And treatments on this can be, well, it really depends on age and health and the severity of the pneumonia, but they could be antibiotics, it could be cough medicines, and it could be fever and pain reducers. And number 9, we have kidney disease. So this presented 2% of all deaths in 2017. And it's when your kidneys, so basically your kidneys filter extra water and waste out of your body to make urine. So when you have kidney disease, it means that your kidneys are damaged and they can't really filter the blood in the way that they should. And people who are more at risk, people more at risk are people with diabetes or high blood pressure. And some treatments to control this is controlling your blood pressure, monitoring your kidney health, medicine, development plan, physical activity, getting enough sleep, and stopping smoking and alcohol intake.
Okay, next we have suicide, which is suicide is the act of killing oneself. Some methods that have been mentioned is cutting, hanging oneself, overdose, and other types of methods. This accounts for 1.7 all deaths in 2017, and it has been estimated that 1.4 million suicide attempts have happened. And it tends to be men tend to die by suicide 3.54 times more often than women. More so in violent ways than normal, like women tend to overdose while men use violent methods like hanging or firearms and all of those things. It really does affect those suffering from clinical depression, bipolar depression, eating disorders, personality disorders, and other mental illnesses. A lot of people tend to only think this affects people with depression, but a lot of people don't understand that people who have depression have also other mental illnesses as well. And we really should stop the stigma. May is actually a mental illness, mental health month, which is great to really talk about suicide and just stop the stigma that we need help. So a little personal story is that I kind of had depression a couple months ago, and I wasn't close to committing suicide, but there were thoughts of me personally having it. The whole episode was really scary to me because I didn't know what was happening. Also, suicide tends not suicide, but depression tends to really affect your mind and how your mind thinks. So I actually brought this up to my therapist one day and about this whole episode, and it was kind of shocking to hear all the things she would say, what was it? Did you have a plan, or did you have anything to what were you doing? And honestly, I did not like have plans about it. I was just thinking about it. But a lot of people like when they go into these stages of like these episodes, they tend to like think a lot of hopelessness. Like there's not much hope that is in this world. Like I don't know if anyone will care about me if I left. No one will like even recognize I'm gone. And it's really like sad to like um think about like your loved one. Maybe um they don't really express being depressed, but like inside they're really like kind of hurting and suffering. So it's to me, throughout my own experience, it's best to like not just like, oh, I'm there for you, but just give that person, those who suffering from suicide, like, oh, I'm here for you, or give them a like, give them a little acts or little things to tell them that everything's going to be okay. And I love this little thing that I got from site that I got reference from is the greatest thing we can do is let people know that they are loved. Sometimes we don't do that a lot often because of our busy schedules, or someone who's depressed might think, oh, I don't think they have enough time for me. Like, why even bother? Like, but just little things like, how are you? How are you okay? Like, just let me know that I'm here for you, stuff like that. Next slide. So it's kind of like what I said earlier. If you or a loved one have ever struggled with suicide, just know that you are not alone. Pain is temporary, but you can get through it. So things that you can do is get professional help. Obviously, we have CAPS on campus, which is a great place to go for. I personally went to CAPS, and I kind of realized my depression was pretty more on the severe side than needed to be. So then I got more professional help, which helped me because I went to psychology today and I found like an amazing therapist for me. And yeah, and she helped me get through my depression. I'm no longer depressed. So that's great. My second one is talk to someone. I said this earlier, like talk to someone about your issues and stuff like that. It's better to like just like let it go and talk about it, even like ugly cry it for like 3 hours, but it's better to release all that you're sad about or all your feelings to someone, and have someone who like you talk to someone who will actually like listen to you and actually like give you the information that you need, because sometimes it cannot be as helpful if they're just there. So practice mindfulness and gratitude. This is a like meditation or I know me and my therapist, we had this thing. It's really nice. It's 21 days of gratitude. So all you do is you do 21 days of gratitude, and you do like 3 things you're grateful for. And then the next day, you try to choose something that's like different. So each like day, you're having new things that you're grateful for. And it's like really mind blowing to see like what you are actually grateful for. Talk to support group. There are actually many like support groups on campus. Just go to CAP, like different for different races, different types of illnesses, and you know it's a great community and it's free on campus. So yeah, just visit CAPS. They have flyers all around. Build a great support system, which is a really good thing. It's nice to know which friendships you actually cherish and which one like you know they're just somewhat there. It's great to like really think of those who, oh, they're gonna be there for me if things go wrong, and like know who you can trust, and spill like all your feelings to them, because it's just gonna have a great support system. You know, whether it be your family, whether it be friends, yeah. And so the next one is National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which I highly recommend. Everyone has this on their phone, whether you may have an episode or someone else you know might have an episode. It's just a great resource. Later, I will introduce the Trevor Project, which they actually have a separate hotline for the LGBTQ community. And yeah, now 7 is self-care. Self-care, like love yourself and be like, just take care of yourself. Where is that? Working out helps serotonin and whatnot. Take days to pamper yourself and treat yourself out. I know at times, like when we're depressed, like you may not want to feel like that and you may not want to like do anything, but yeah, you treat yourself to something. It's just a really nice thing to do for yourself, especially if you're not feeling a-okay. And for those, check up on your loved ones. That's like a pretty big thing. They might say, "Oh, I'm good," but pretty much if like something's off, it's probably true. Like this, something is pretty off. So like really check up on them. Like, or like tell them everything's gonna be okay. Or where you're struggling, you're gonna get through it. Like this is only temporary. And yeah, okay. The next slide. Okay, so this next slide is actually the Trevor Project. Like I said before, it's the LGBTQ community way to like help those suffering from like depression, suicide. Now coming out is a very difficult thing for others, and you know people in this community get bullied a lot for just being themselves, and it's really shocking to see that like as we say like in Glee, that's a very popular show. Chris is pretty much bullied a lot, and it's a hard thing to like understand, especially if you're not from the community, and especially like seeing like those suffering from it. It's kind of a different perspective than what you think. So this is a little clip from the Trevor film. It's actually a Academy Award directors that actually like did this film. So this little part is basically showing Trevor. This is the part like right before he thinks about killing himself. So this is kind of like the last straw, the last little thing that he's gonna give out before he like attempts suicide. So yeah, play a clip.
I've decided to start a new life. I'm going to change. First, I will dye my hair and eyelashes. Next, I will change my name, my identity. Then I'll change schools. And maybe I'll go to Mexico. And as of now, I'm definitely changing my religion.
Trevor?
Dear Diary, today in English class, Mr. Keenest asked me to read aloud from my report on the short story. I chose for my topic, the loss of innocence as reflected in literature. The loss of innocence is brought about because of an experience with no explanation. The character must experience this loss, must be involved in the experience, must react with natural spontaneity, must be hurt, must survive. The experience must be potent enough to be remembered, must create a subtle change in the character. Mr. Keenest gave me an A for my report. No one knows I copied this all from a book. I think he's still ignoring me. I must be invisible. Dear Diary, sometimes I imagine that I will lead an extreme and glamorous life somewhere in the tropics. Sometimes I imagine that I will be famous and everyone will want to be photographed in my presence. Sometimes I imagine that I will die an early death and everyone will be sorry. Everybody at school saying that I'm a gay. It must be showing. But I look at myself and I don't see anything that's different. No one understands. My life is now an obvious tragedy.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the Trevor film. It's really powerful, and I really highly recommend watching the whole film. It just shows a very powerful message about how it's really hard and difficult to come out, and especially like not having your peers accept you, nor having your family accept you for who you actually are. And unfortunately, a lot of people from the LGBT community commit suicide due to this hurtful like act of not understanding. And yeah, next slide. Okay, so we wanted to talk and bring up pandemics since that's obviously something very relevant right now, especially what we're living in. So a little bit of background of like different other pandemics like beforehand. So obviously we had the 1918 influenza pandemic. This happened, majority of pandemics pretty much last a year, which is kind of unfortunate. We'll might see in our future. So this one is really the most severe, deadliest pandemic in 20th century. Hopefully, this pandemic doesn't surpass that. So this is basically the start of like the H1N1 virus with genes of variant origin. It was first identified in the military personnel in spring 1918, which is obviously the same time as I think World War II, I believe. 50 million worldwide were affected, and United States affecting 65,000 individuals. Mortality rates were high in ages younger than 5, ages 20 and 40 years old, and 65 old and older. Unfortunately, there was no vaccines, which obviously causes the high percentage of death. And yeah, there was no antibodies to treat the secondary bacterial infection. They only use non-pharmaceutical interventions, which is similar like what we do right now, which is stay at home, wash your hands, try to social distance each other. So they had that back then, but obviously they didn't have the media to tell everyone. So this was kind of loosely like restricted and loosely informed. So that's why there was more deaths here, because obviously media wasn't too much of a thing back then. And unfortunately, this one occurred in 3 waves. And that's why it kind of lasted a little bit. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I think we all like recognize back then the swine flu. This is kind of back in 2009. Obviously, we know about the swine flu and then the Great Recession after or during. And yeah, this is just a little bit of a review of what happened during that pandemic. It wasn't as severe as like this one and the influenza in 1918. But yeah, this really helped with the vaccination process. And it will later just get into that. So play the clip.
In the spring of 2009, public health officials were alerted to an unusual outbreak of influenza.
Tuesday, we reported that we had confirmed 2 cases of influenza that were swine flu in children in California.
On April 23, 2009, the CDC announced that this strain of influenza had not been seen before in the U.S. or anywhere in the world. It was a new strain of flu.
Today, Mexico's Minister of Health confirmed that they have cases of swine influenza in people, and that they believe some of the people who were infected died from swine influenza.
The world was confronted with a new flu virus to which it appeared no one had immunity. The potential existed for a severe pandemic. The public health community responded.
Last night, I arrived in Washington and immediately after my swearing in, met with officials from the White House to discuss the national response to the flu outbreak.
Yesterday, we announced the release of material from our strategic national stockpile.
Currently, the FDA and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are developing virus reference strains. HHS and the Food and Drug Administration will monitor the manufacturing of a potential vaccine and conduct strict oversight to ensure that the vaccine is safe and effective for use. As the vaccine manufacturing is underway, the NIH will also conduct clinical trials to make sure that the best dosage and formulation of the vaccine is available.
Over the last week, my administration has taken several precautions to address the challenge posed by the 2009 H1N1 flu virus.
Those precautions included disseminating public health recommendations through a variety of media and developing a candidate vaccine virus in less than 3 weeks. By June, there were 18,000 cases of H1N1 flu in the U.S.
WHO has officially declared us to be in a pandemic.
In July of 2009, scientists and public health experts from across the country came together in a pan-flu summit at NIH to discuss the most effective ways to minimize the impact of the H1N1 flu.
We're aggressively planning for a vaccination program.
The National Institutes of Health directed clinical trials of the H1N1 flu vaccine beginning in August. Trials were conducted on adults, children, pregnant women, and individuals with underlying health conditions.
I believe this is something that this federal government in this administration is doing correctly. And I hope that the American people will support the government and support their fellow citizens by getting immunization to the H1N1 virus in the order that they are supposed to take it, and will follow up.
HHS announced it was making $350 million available in grants to state and local agencies for pandemic preparedness resources and activities. HHS and the public health community continued to spread the word on not spreading the flu.
As I said when we saw the first cases of this virus back in the spring, I don't want anybody to be alarmed, but I do want everybody to be prepared. We know that we usually get a second, larger wave of these flu viruses in the fall, and so response plans have been put in place across all levels of government. For all that we do in the federal government, however, every American has a role to play in responding to this virus.
The FDA has licensed the H1N1 vaccine from 4 of the 5 manufacturers. We also have data now that there's a good antibody response to the vaccines.
So we are now up to 76 children having died from the 2009 H1N1 virus. To put that in context, the past 3 years, the total pediatric influenza deaths ranged from 46 to 88.
Although the production and delivery of vaccine was slower than hoped, 3 million doses of nasal spray vaccine were available in October as state and local agencies began holding H1N1 flu shot clinics. Media campaigns encouraged the public to get vaccinated and answered questions about the risks and benefits of the vaccine.
So talk about ingredients, some of these words that raise concerns.
Well, the main ingredient in the vaccine is a purified protein from the virus, okay? That is what stimulates you to have a response that can protect you against the virus.
If this H1N1 pandemic influenza virus had appeared in November or the beginning of December, we would have incorporated it into one of the components of the seasonal flu, and no one would be asking the question, is this a brand new vaccine for a brand new virus? Because the viruses change each year, and we change the vaccines each year.
In the month of November, H1N1 influenza was widespread in 48 states. People under the age of 24 accounted for 1/2 of flu-related hospitalizations. The number of vaccine doses available grew from 35.6 million to 54 million 2 weeks later. By the beginning of December, about 46 million people had been vaccinated, and states reported fewer new cases of influenza.
We're going from a time where there was lots of disease and not enough vaccine to a time where disease is gradually decreasing and we're having a steady increase in the amount of vaccine that's available.
Many people are still susceptible to this virus and would benefit from vaccination. We want to avoid complacency. Today, I'm happy to say that we have a very good supply of the H1N1 vaccine all around the country. Going forward, the H1N1 virus is still circulating in the US, and we expect it to continue to circulate for some time. We need to stay vigilant.
Current estimates are that 15% of the U.S. population has been infected with the 2009 H1N1 virus, resulting in some 265,000 hospitalizations and 12,000 deaths. Between 72 and 81 million Americans were immunized for H1N1 flu by mid-February, including 1/3 of all children. The close cooperation between federal, state, and local agencies that allowed an effective response to the 2009 H1N1 flu makes the U.S. better prepared to meet public health challenges in the future.
Okay, yeah. And now I'm just gonna kind of give the facts about the H1N1 flu during 2009. As you guys kind of know, like the seasonal flu and why we get our flu shots, this is kind of one of the main reasons why we actually do it because of this pandemic. So everyone knows this as influenza A, and it was first detected, as you see in the video, April of 2009 in the United States. What's interesting about this one is there has been in the past many other waves of H1N1. So each time, each pandemic that has happened in the past, it's been a different form or combination And it always changes like each time each pandemic happens, as like stated in the video. So yeah, this is a unique combination of influenza genes not previously detected in animals or people prior. Young people have antibodies to protect against the virus, and 1/3 of older people, 65 years and older, have antibodies against the virus. Now, this is kind of due to the fact of the 1918 and like the other past pandemics of the H1N1 flu that they adapted to different type of antibodies that was recognized in the past. So that's why younger people are more susceptible about this influenza compared to the older people because they've already like contacted it beforehand, whether you had the illness or not. There's 60.8 million cases and around 272 received hospitalization, 12,000 deaths were in the United States. It wasn't until like November they had large quantities of vaccine that became available. And as you saw, this started in April 2009, and it kind of happened when they got the vaccine, the second wave hit, and it was at its like peak. So it was nice to have like a large quantity of the vaccine now available. That's why majority of the times we tend to have our vaccines around October, November time. Mainly because the influenza hits more during that time and it's like the flu season. This primarily affects young children and young middle-aged adults. However, 70 to 90% of deaths occurred in adults 65 years and older, especially with the swine flu or other flus, H1N1 related. It really does affect like young middle-aged adults being more susceptible. As we saw, a lot of young children have been affected by the swine flu or just other flus in general, and that's why like they also have like the nasal spray available for them as well. They made it accommodating for them, easier to take it as a child, and yeah. Next slide. Okay, so we all know what the coronavirus is. We're currently in that pandemic right now. So yes, this is the 2009 coronavirus, COVID-19 virus. This is basically a novel coronavirus, which is basically a new coronavirus that is previously not identified. So there has been like coronaviruses in the past, but obviously a lot of viruses change during its course of the time. So this is like a new one. So it changes a lot. And as you've seen in the news, that slow progression and changes often. That's why a lot of safety precautions and things like that have been changing, where it'd be like confusing things like, is it airborne? Is it respiratory droplets? So it's kind of confusing. And right now, a lot of the research is still in development and it's still new. So a lot of information is coming up each and every day. So it's hard for it's best to have updates about like what the coronavirus is and what's happening, what you need to know. So it's good to have little updates here and there, but don't be too invested into the news because it's kind of a little bit morbid and sad. So like I said, it's not the same as other coronaviruses. It can show mild symptoms of mild upper respiratory illnesses like the common cold, but it's not like the same thing. It was first identified in Wuhan, China, and people are at a higher risk, those ages of 65 years and older, and people with underlying health conditions like diabetes and heart disease and all these other underlying. And even like right now, we're thinking about respiratory systems, since it really affects the upper respiratory, those with asthma, those who have smoked in the past, and those who have like very heavily in the lungs can be really heavily affected since the coronavirus really hits your upper respiratory system. Okay, next slide. So right now, this is as of April 29, 2020. So yeah, this was kind of a couple days before. Now, obviously, the numbers have changed. So currently, we do have over 1 million cases over the U.S. And the U.S. we have 57,000 like deaths total. Now this is just in the U.S. The numbers in like other global countries are changing. So yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as we know, like here in the news, these are all taken from the CDC. So this is like really good information. So if you kind of see the symptoms, it can be coughing, shortness of breath, and difficult breathing. And they have to have at least 2 of these symptoms, either fever, chills, repeated shaking with chills, muscle pains, headache, sore throat, and which is actually kind of came up without like the past weeks as the new loss of taste and smell. Yeah. And obviously we've heard about the prevention of coronavirus. And these are little things that you can do to like flatten the curve and to help, you know, kind of stop the virus and like at least like take a break with the deaths that are happening and give like people time to hospitalizations, and the vaccines are hopefully coming up soon. So obviously we heard about social distancing, which we are currently all doing right now, staying at home, not really going around places, staying 6 feet apart, since a lot of it affects like water droplets, and water droplets can affect people from like 6 feet and like under. So yeah, and we obviously are doing shelter in place, staying at home, not really going outside, and making connections towards others. Yeah, and now we're also like washing our hands for 20 seconds. It's a really good thing to do it all the time, especially if you touch something. I do this all the time when I get groceries or find packages. Make sure like you wash your hands and don't touch your face. Make sure you use masks. Obviously, this is a very new thing that happened recently, is enforcing masks everywhere you go, and have face coverings when out in public. People can refuse services if you don't wear a mask, and it's just safer to others that you just wear a mask. Cover your cough and sneezes, very basic thing to do with your elbow, and yeah, and make sure you clean and disinfect. I know it's hard to find disinfectants, but make sure you just clean and keep your areas nice and clean, especially with viruses or packages, or have safe precautions when you eat out and get groceries. So yeah. So we wanted to add mass shootings, because that's kind of a pretty heavily topic that we've been like seeing often the years. So yeah, mass shootings, any incidents that which at least 4 people are shot, excluding the shooter. In the United States, there have been 417 mass shootings in 2019 alone, which was actually the highest recording of mass shootings ever since 2014. And it's kind of interesting to see that a lot of the shooters were teens. So yeah, and this happened, Trump talked about this recently in one of the recent shootings. Video games, is it affecting young teenagers, those wanting to bear firearms that are at home, and does it affect those shooters who commit these mass shootings? And obviously mental health, obviously those who are affected, or those who actually do the mass shootings, they may have symptoms of different like personality disorders, or maybe depression and all these other underlying things. That's also with the same thing with the stigma, and like helping them like see that it's not the best method to their thinking is just killing everyone else. The big thing is the Second Amendment. Should we ban guns? Obviously, it's a heavy topic, controversial. People are like, oh, we should have guns at home for safety, or others, it's like, it's just safer that like we don't have guns. I know other countries have banned guns, and it kind of helped reduce the mass shootings. Obviously, America is very heavily invested in guns. It's our Second Amendment, and we've been using guns like in the past. So we'll see if it actually happens, if we actually do want to ban guns in the future, or at least restrict them. I know we started restricting, but it's still a big issue. Now I have a little clip here. It's basically all the 2009 shootings. Obviously, this doesn't count the past before that, like Sandy Hooks and Parkland. But yeah, this is just 2009. So play the clip. So yeah, yeah. Next slide. Okay, so I actually wanted to bring this in, which is basically I participated in a walk called March for Our Lives, and this was a big thing right after I believe the Parkland mass shooting, and it was basically like helping those like talk about banning guns and at least restricting them and not having them in our like have someone in our schools. So yeah, basically a bunch of us people in our my community gathered up and we hold signs and we basically marched around like Santa Clarita area, and we basically just went around the area and protesting about banning guns and getting away from guns. I thought the picture on the far left is very like striking. When I took the picture, these are actually all my pictures. When I took these pictures, it's very like moving, especially the one on the left. It's a little kid and it's saying, if you can't read the text, but it's protect me, not guns. And I thought that was even though it's like a little scribble, but it's still a very powerful thing. Like kids, even like his age, can be affected, as we seen in Sandy Hooks. Yeah, and I think for me, what I personally wanted to, and a bunch of people my age wanted to talk about is that, you know, people like his age, the young kid right there, like they can't really protect themselves and they can really do anything besides hide. And a lot of schools here, they teach you what to do with a shooter, just like run, hide, and do all the things. But what is our country actually doing to protect us from guns? They're just telling us to like hide and how ways to protect ourselves, but instead of like reinforcing, like we should ban, like stop guns like from being in our schools. And you know, this is like schools is technically supposed to be a safe haven for us, and we're still like scared. And I know this recently happened with Cal State Long Beach when we had the shooter on our campus, well, potential shooter. And yeah, it's a little scary thing to do, like especially not having locked doors on our like no locked doors, like how are we supposed to protect ourselves, or do teachers really care? Like they just kept on going with lectures, and I know that's like a big thing that's like happening. What is our school doing to protect us from mass shootings? You know, it's a scary thing to think about, and if people like don't care, then that's a consequence that we have to face. Or we don't have locked doors, or like how can we protect ourselves? You know, yeah, it's a scary thing. It's happened in concerts, happened in gay clubs, it's happening in schools, it's happening movie theaters. Like everywhere we go, we're thinking like, is it safe? Is it safe out there? Like what happens if I get involved in the mass shooting? What will happen? You just never know now. And it's better to be protected with our like rights and knowing that maybe guns should be banned. Obviously, this is a controversial topic. Everyone has their own opinions about it. But yeah, this can really help reduce the deaths of those who are affected by mass shootings. And as we saw in the video, like there's a lot of mass shootings we don't know about because it's not a high percentage, or there's not a high amount of deaths that are involved. So we should just take a look on that as well. There's more mass shootings than we actually do believe just actually happened. Only like TV broadcast is the biggest one, but there actually have been other mass shootings that have happened that's like in lesser numbers. So yeah.
So now we will be moving on to our interviews and applying the double ABCX model to them. So the first interview pertains to my mom. She does not speak English fluently, so I did my best at asking her the questions and then translating them into English. So I'll be reading them as first person. The activating event plus the stress pileups. I would say that the activating event was getting the results back from the doctors, informing us that our mom was diagnosed with colon cancer stage 4. Some of the polyps included numerous sessions of radiotherapy and chemotherapy, having to travel for about 3 hours to the nearest hospital that could provide her with these treatments, because at this point my grandma was in Mexico, and over there it's kind of hard. It's more complicated getting a lot of medical health and medical care that is of a really high quality for cancer treatments. The fact that she had to be away from us for long periods of time in order for her to get better with the medical treatment she needed, being away from her and her being away from us, constant worries of not knowing what was happening with her, and every little step of the way. Another pileup was after 5 months of constant stress and worries that contributed to the polyps. We had no other choice but to send her to the hospital because she could no longer be with us. After a few tests at the hospital, the doctor notified us that the cancer had expanded and there was nothing more to do. She was at the last and final stage, and all we could do was just wait for the final day to come. This happened in the course of a week. We took her to the hospital on Monday. We received the news on Wednesday, and she passed away on Saturday. For B, which is the initial and attain resources, the initial, it was family and loved one support, faith and hope, financial support. Although it was far to get that medical health care that we needed, they did get that treatment. Some of the attained resources, resilience, motivation to move on. Being the second oldest from my 5 sisters, I had to maintain a determination to keep on living and support my youngest siblings, and also perseverance to maintain a healthy and loving family, because at that time my mom had myself and my brother. I was 8 at the time and my brother was 5 at the time. Next slide, please. Thank you. Perception. Initial, it was a vast amount of sadness, confused in how big the situation was, difficulty in trying to understand the illness and to assimilate to what was going to happen. And then the change was, with the enormous amount of pain, I have accepted and understood that for me, she is in a better place than how she was when she was with me for the last few days. For this only reason, I have learned to accept her death, because I know she is in a better place now. And then for bon adaptation and maladaptation, I'm so sorry. I started with maladaptation because I was in a complete denial, anger, depression, literally went over all 5 stages of coping with death. And it changed to bon adaptation because I have learned to accept, and I am thankful of the time that she was with me and the memories I have with her. And that is a picture of my grandma, my mom, and me at that time. My grandma passed away a few months after that picture was taken.
Thank you for sharing that. Like your family, I also happened to lose my grandmother, and it was also to cancer. So she was the first death in our family. So before her, we didn't really know how it felt like to really lose someone. And that was kind of our first experience getting to know what it was like. So just a little bit of background. She was diagnosed with lung cancer in January 2019. And when she was diagnosed, it kind of came as a shock to all of us because she had never really smoked in her life. For the times that we did see her, she was so active. She was smiling. She was walking around and joking with us. And then 2 months after we found out, she passed away in March 2019. And to help describe the ABCX model, I interviewed my sister, Javelosa. All right. Sorry, just a little bit more background. In lung cancer pertaining to gender, age, and race, it mostly occurs in people 65 and older. The average age is about 70. So my grandmother is actually a little bit older when she was diagnosed. She was 88 at the time. And more people die of lung cancer than colon, breast, and prostate cancers all combined. So it is like I said before, the one that kills the most, but it's also something that people don't really think about, because breast cancer was the one that people are most diagnosed with, but lung cancer is the one that people are diagnosed from. So in the ABCX model, we have a Chester event and the chest pileups. So when she died, my sister said that the Chester event was the death of our grandmother, and the chest pileups this was around midterm season. This was actually like right when midterm started. It was like, I think the last week of March last semester. So she had to focus on that. She had to, go through all of that. She was also working. And at the time, we actually weren't able to see her because we couldn't afford the full medical care here. So we actually sent her to the Philippines with the rest of her family over there. And there she received like the full medical care. Someone was always watching over her. But the toll on that is that we weren't able to see her anymore. And then for B, initial and attained resources, my sister said that she had a lot of support from her boyfriend and from her friends when she did lose her grandmother. Everyone was very caring. Everyone was saying that they were there for her and that if she needed someone to talk to, they were there. However, since it was her first time losing someone, she wasn't very comfortable talking to a lot of people about it. So she said she didn't really talk a lot about it, and she said that like she kind of held in her feelings, and that kind of took a toll on her as well. And attain resources, when she did die, we got to see, it was in Philippines again, so we got to see pictures of her funeral, which was, she said it was like a mix. It was also the same for me. It was like a mix of emotions, because it was kind of like, oh, we lost her. It was like a for sure thing now, but it was also like, okay, like she's not in pain anymore. She's okay now. So that was one of the resources. And I think the whole event made our entire family kind of closer together, because we were all going through the same thing, and we had all lost someone that we really truly loved. So our support and love like from each other was what really made us stronger throughout everything. And then C, initial perception and whether it changed. So obviously initially she was devastated throughout the whole thing. Again, first time losing someone she loved, and from the time that we had found out that she had lung cancer to the time that she died, it was 2 months, so it kind of felt sudden to her. But the change was that she was glad that my nanay, which is what we call her, that nanay was like no longer in pain and that she wasn't suffering anymore. And she is religious, so she believes that she's with God and that she's watching over all of us. So every day, it's been a year now since she passed away, and every day we still think about her, and like we are sad that she's not with us, but like we're actually very lucky that we got to keep her for so long and that she lived her life to the longest and fullest and that she was loved. So X equals the maladaptation or bond adaptation. And ultimately there was bond adaptation, because we kind of came to peace with what happened. And even though it felt kind of sudden when it was happening, it was still knowing that she had such a long life and people that loved her, and we still think of her every day.
So now we're going to talk a little about understanding death and the process of death, which we are going to start with a book. Next slide, please. So a book that I found interesting in regards to the topic of death and dying was Understanding Dying, Death, and Environment by Michael R. Lemming and George E. Dickinson. So the main objectives are to just sensitize people to the subject of death and dying, aid those who have experienced the loss of a loved one, and help individuals examine their own feelings and reactions to death and grieving, in order to make the readers understand more of the cultural differences that go when dealing and understanding with death and dying, because every person understands it differently. Every person has different reactions, different emotions. It is never the same exact process for everybody. Everybody experiences this in very different ways. Some of the topics that the book cover, there are cross-cultural examples of traditions, customs, and when they bury rights through the end of the life issues. Basically, kind of touches upon what the beliefs that the culture brings into our own families and our own selves of what happens after we die. The different theories are introduced from Piaget cognitive stages of development, and then Durkheim's four type of suicide and Erickson's developmental stages, which also focus on the psychological aspect of death and dying, trying to understand human behavior, human emotion, the cognitive steps that go with you, and just making sure that it's not just you physically being okay, but psychologically being okay and emotionally being okay as well. The author explained death by analyzing it from a biological, psychological, anthropological, and sociological approach, because death itself is a topic that crosses across multiple different stages, from your mind to your body to your soul to your beliefs to even how physically a death of a loved one can affect you. The authors emphasize that we must learn to cope with death because it will not diminish over time, but it will continue to be part of life. The death of someone does not mean that it is something that we are going to just forget about. It is something that will continue to be with us in the long run, in the short term. It is something that we're always going to remember. But the author kind of encourages the readers to like bond adaptation on it. Make sure that you accept it, that you feel good knowing that that person is in another place, a better place, or that they're resting. Next slide. Also, the book highlights that society must learn to talk about death with our young people and explain it to those who are children. They need to understand their emotions and the concept of death. And the more we age, the less we are frightened and we become to accept it and begin to depend on the intellectual, educational, and social skills, because our physical powerness will diminish eventually over time. And that is one of the things that I found very important, because when my grandma died, I was 8 years old and I did not necessarily understand the concept of death. I don't know, I saw her and I thought that I would see her again. And just now that I think about it as an adult, I get more sad, and just I remember and cherish those moments that I actually do still have memory of her. And I think that's also very important to talk with children about death and dying in order to validate their emotions and to validate the feelings that they may have, because the kids also go through the process of grief. And one of the topics that was brought to my attention while analyzing this book was the author's transformative process with grief, which includes three components that can be understood with three questions, which is what have I lost, and what do I have left, and what may be possible for me. And it kind of analyzes like every tense, like the past, the present, and the future. And that what may be possible for me is very important, because it's okay, this is what happened and this is a fact, and now I have to make sure that I am able to move on and continue to look forward, because you know you're alive and people love you, and those loved ones that died, they loved you so much, and you have to continue living a life. Some of the next slide, sorry. Some of the sources that I found in regards to understanding death, it was resources talking about death and dying, and then resources for understanding death. The talking about death and dying included some videos about group meetings where adults and children and teenagers talk about what they understand about death, what is important about death. And then some of them also do share some personal stories. And I found it very interesting because Personal stories just have a greater impact than reading data or statistics or any type of other information, because it makes you feel human. It makes you see that it was the pain that you carry. Sometimes some other people also share it. And it is very important to understand and to feel and to know that those feelings, someone else feels them, and now they are okay, and you'll be okay too, because you're trying to understand the process of grieving. And then the other one, Resources for Understanding Death, it provided a lot of information about the grieving process. Personal stories, personal connection matters a lot. They made an emphasis on that. It has articles, list of books. It has some motivational talks, and it also has other type of information that is in regard to cultural or traditional or religion based, depending on your religion. And I found that very interesting too, because it varies from different cultures, different ethnicities, and it provides that sense of faith and belonging with a lot of other resources and information. Next slide. So now we are going to talk about coping strategies and stress management techniques. So while I was looking for journal articles, one of the articles that was brought to my attention while reading it, it was in regards to a study that analyzed the relation between parent and child coping strategies by examining the influence of the parents' coping mechanisms and how those coping mechanisms have an effect on the children. And basically, the research question evolved in regards to, will the parents' coping act as a moderator between parental distress and child distress? Basically highlighting is how the parent copes with the death of someone. Will the kid learn coping mechanisms or coping strategies from the parent? And the results indicated that parental coping did have an impact on children's grief symptoms. This represents a unique view of adaptation in children. Parental coping strategies can have an impact on the child and on the child by focusing on parent coping, and they highlighted another possible pathway through which parental functioning affects children's grief. So basically, the study highlighted that the way a parent deals with the death of a loved one, whether they manage to have healthy coping strategies, the children is going to learn that, and the children will cope and adapt and will learn from those coping strategies. And in that process of learning later on, whenever the child experiences a death in the family or a death of a friend, they will use those healthy coping mechanisms, and they will make sure that they move on like their parents did. And that highlights the positive parenting, how positive parenting can influence these factors, including self-esteem, ability to seek social support, and to enact coping strategies, which is one of the things that I think it was the second presentation that talked about the relationships of parents and children and how those healthy habits that parents have carry on until the children. Also, the results indicated positive parenting was associated with less mental health problems in children, regardless of gender. And also, the authors proposed several other mechanisms that could influence to more positive parenting. And it showed a high percentage that the parents' coping strategies do create an influence on the emotional state of the children and do help them to obtain those healthier coping mechanisms for whenever they experience a death or a loss of someone that they love later on in life. And then moving on. So another website that I found in regards to family, it was a group support. And this one is actually in LA. It provides information about grief support services, education, and resources for people of different ages. It is based on in-house or school-based. It serves as a way to discuss the feelings and emotions in a safe environment and to find ways to cope with them and learn to grow and move on with their lives. Uh, the adults and children cope with many different things in many different ways. So the fact that this group support focuses a lot on children, adolescents, teenagers, creates a good impact and a good influence in them in order for them to learn healthy strategies and coping mechanisms for later on in life. Um, and then one of the main stress management techniques that we'll probably discuss in class or have already is the 5 stages of Kubler-Ross, which is denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, and depression and acceptance. And basically denial, you just blocking all kinds of emotions. Anger, complete mad, you cannot accept what has happened. Bargaining, you just you try to give up your own life for the life of the loved one that you lost. Depression, it is a complete dark stage. And then acceptance is when you come to the conclusion that they are in a better place. I am accepting it. I am not going to forget, but I will do what is best for me so that I can move on with my family, with my life, and with your emotions and feelings as well. And then examination of ethnic and gender influences. Okay, so now part 3, we're going to examine gender and ethnic influences. Now we're going to focus on ethnic influences. As we had discussed, the 10 causes of death, one of the major ethnic influences that come into hand is that African Americans have higher rates of mortality than does any other racial or ethnic group for 8 out of the 10 top causes of death. And it is mainly due to lack of resources, financial stability, and medical care. And a recent data analysis conducted by the CDC in 2017, they gathered the death mortality rates and included factors such as ethnic, background, and identification that they found in the following. So in 2017, the age-adjusted death rates for major race and ethnicity groups were non-Hispanic Black population, mainly consisted of African Americans, was 1.2 times for that of non-Hispanic white population. And among race, ethnicity, sex group, the adjusted rate for drug-induced cases increased significantly in 2017 from 2016. For non-Hispanic Black males, it was about 23%, non-Hispanic Black females, 14.7%, and Hispanic males, 13.5%. Next slide. So now we will look at some gender influences. According to a longitudinal study that was conducted by the World Health Statistics, it states that based on recent mortality risks, men will live on average 69.8 years and women 74.2 years. So that is a difference of 4.4 years. Life expectancy at age 60 years is also greater for women than for men. It is a 21.9 versus 19 years. Globally, the male to female ratio at birth is from 105 to 110 males to every, 105 to 110 males to every 100 females. However, because male mortality rates are higher across the life course, the sex ratio does decrease throughout life. This study also emphasized that women have longer life expectancy than men because women are expected to live 7.6% longer than men do at age 20 and 14% longer at age 80. So as it stated, it increases over time. Some of the differences in life expectancy between men and women are due to biological sex differences. Some of the causes of death occur in only one sex. For example, those related to sexual and reproductive anatomy, such as cervical cancer in women and prostate cancer in men. Other conditions can occur in both women and men, but their prevalence is influenced by a biological sex difference. Death rates for heart disease, it is lower in women because of higher levels of hormone and estrogen. And then tuberculosis infection rates are higher in men due to immunological reasons. And then for some other conditions, death rates are similar in men and women if they are exposed to the same risk, but exposure to risk differs in gender-related factors such as occupation, and that could be a stereotypical example. For example, like office jobs, desk jobs is practically you see kind of women, and then construction jobs where there are way more risk and people can actually, lose their life or lose a part of their body. Construction is hardcore. That is more typical of males. And there is where the difference is involved in those two. And with that, you can see on the side, that is a graph, and also on the ethnic influences, there's also a graph that shows the percentages through the longitudinal study that was conducted for both influences. And next slide. And those are our references and more. And then one more slide. And with that, we conclude our presentation on death and dying. And yes.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks.